We are back. We only discussed items listed on the agenda in our closed session. I'd like to have a roll call to come back in session.
Yes.
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 Yes?
Yes.
All right, thank you. We were at the reports for subcommittees, am I correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Community Outreach Committee, Chantel?
All right, so the Community Outreach Committee, or the Outreach Subcommittee, met on September 25th. It was kind of a preparation meeting that was intended that we would be preparing for the study session with City Council. And so there wasn't really much else that was discussed at that point. Since then, I have been in contact with KRQE, who's going to be looking at doing a story on the POB and the CPOA. And then I was approached by the New Mexico Inquisition, which is kind of a grassroots, web-based news outlet. I think it's like part comedy, late night comedy kind of based, and then informational, and they would like to do a story with Director Harness and myself, so we're going to be arranging dates for that. I guess really until we have our next meeting, when we should have some more updates as far as like collateral materials and stuff. That's all I have for right now. So we are scheduled to meet on October 23rd. Right now it's scheduled for 2:30, but I think we're going to swap that with the case review committee and meet at 1.
Okay.
And that's it.
All right, thank you. Policy and procedures review, Dr. Cass.
So this is a summary of what's happened, I think, since one of our most recent policy and procedure meeting. But what I would like to talk about tonight is what the progress that's been made. And as you heard City Attorney Schmiel mention the status with the use of force suite. What I've done here is I've included with the materials a list of events that occurred in recent process, and I just enclose this so that you could get a sense of the a number of activities that had actually taken place in the process of getting 252 approved. I don't want to go through these in detail, but I just wanted to make this list so that you could see what reviews had occurred and what public input had been taken, and things such as that. And so this is a result of the database that I've been working on, and that we'll have discussions about later. We've had these in the policy committee, but so we won't bring them up here. But this is the sort of the work product of that. And if you look at the sheet labeled SOP 252 activities, I'll just mention that the first column shows the document that's associated with that, and I spared you the list of documents so that in the interest of saving trees, but that's now available to connect the event with whatever documentation was associated with it. So that deals with the use of force. I think Attorney Schmiel did a good job of stating where the rest of the use of force suite is and the progress that's being, where that's going. As far as these other activities, there's one other that I'd just like to highlight, and that is PPRB meetings. I've made a list of PPRB meetings that have occurred, and actually I think it's from the beginning of the current version of the CPOA. But I'd just like you to point out, this is 3 pages long. The first page, near the bottom, there's there's a break, and I just wanted to point out that between the end of November of 2017 and almost the 1st of May in 2018, there was not very much activity, if any, in terms of policy recommendations and PPRB activities. And so this, of course, corresponded to the new administration. And so when the new administration came in, there was a large backlog of policies to be reviewed. And then the next 2 pages essentially shows the progress that was made on those policies. So they're now through that part of the process. So I'll leave it at that. And then there's one other document, and that is POB activities related to the APD review process. And I've actually called this a project of our own, but what it is, it's the list of essentially all the meetings that deal with policy review in the APD. So this gives you a summary of what the policy committee is associated with. So that's my policy report.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Cass. Case Review Subcommittee. Ms. St. John.
Yeah, our case review committee meeting was on September the 25th, 2018 at 1 p.m. We reviewed 9 administratively closed cases. A unanimous vote was taken for these cases to be placed on tonight's consent agenda. Also at this meeting, we reviewed and discussed appeal case 053-18. At this meeting, Director Harness gave us additional information that he had received. We voted to move this case to our next meeting so we can have the time to review the new information. This case will be on the agenda for our next meeting, which is currently scheduled for October the 23rd, 2018 at 2:30.
Okay. Anything else?
No.
Okay. And you said your next meeting is when?
Our next meeting is October the 23rd, 2018 at 2:30.
Okay. Okay, the Personnel Subcommittee will be scheduling a meeting next week to discuss our personnel issues. So that date will come next week. We'll move on to discussions. Police Oversight Board's policy and procedure. I think that's yours.
Yes. Thank you, Chair Waits. So this is an ongoing project. I agreed to compile suggested changes to our policies and procedures for the board for consideration. So I executed that compilation. I followed up by forwarding the proposed changes, which are relatively minor, really, to our council so that she could vet things that were suggested for conflicts with the CASA and the ordinance, because I was sure that some of that would probably come up. And so what you have in front of you is the policies and procedures with some highlighted changes and then some changes proposed in the commentary. And so the proposed changes the sources of the proposed language changes are from Board Member Joanne Fine, Vice Chair Galloway. One member of the public submitted some to me via email, and then myself. And I think they're mostly denoted in here where the origin of those suggestions come from. So I think there's no way around just going through this document. So I guess that's what I'm intending to do, unless anyone has, and we could just do a one-by-one thing, unless anyone would like me to approach it differently.
So the highlighted items in blue are the changes, am I correct?
Well, there are changes that are highlighted, and then there are also proposed changes in the comments section on the margins of the document.
Okay, that's what
Yeah, okay. So, the first changes we see is Article 1, Section 3. It's an edit, set forth the structure of the POB and CPOA. Added language would be quote-unquote POB and. Does anyone have any objection to accepting this change?
No.
No? Okay. And then the second change is just to be consistent grammatically, it changes the word it to they.
Okay.
Okay. The second suggested change came from Vice Chair Chantal wanting to strike the word shall in Article 2, Section 2. However, that language comes from the ordinance, so it appears we should not strike that word. Does anyone have an objection to not accepting this change?
No.
Okay. Next, you will find Article 2, Section 7, records. Vice Chair Galloway, suggested striking the word analyst and serve as the. I provided a note thinking, I was so certain that that was in the ordinance. Our attorney, I think, suggests, our attorney, however, responded that this is not in the CASA nor the ordinance. And I went back and looked for it because I was so positive it was in there. But it appears that that is not in the ordinance. So it does appear that we can move forward with either Vice Chair Galloway's suggestion, which would be to simply strike the words analyst and serve as the, or I proposed some type of rewrite. I thought both of these suggestions are along the same lines, Vice Chair Galloway's and mine. I elaborated a bit more so that it could be more clear for members of the public when they were making IPRA requests. So I would like to get the board's feedback on what we should do with this section, if anything.
And if I may, since one of those is my recommendation, the reason for that is brevity and also not to back ourselves or the CPOA into a corner where somebody is designated as responsible. It's CPOA is responsible for serving as our records custodian. So that's the reasoning behind that.
Yes, I think that makes sense. We don't have an analyst at this time. We've had discussions about why we don't currently have an analyst as designated within the ordinance. And so I think some change is appropriate, but I don't know what anyone else might think about this.
I'm fine with the change.
We just need to decide which one.
Which one?
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay, I like the one that you put, which starts with the executive director, CPO shall serve as the records. I like that one. That would be my choice.
okay, Dr. Cass, did you have any idea?
No, I agree. I agree with the more lengthy change that describes the situation.
Okay. And so I'm just going to note that we are accepting, I'm going to refer to myself in the third person right now, Board Member Van Deventer's
You can abbreviate that.
language changes to this section. Okay. Next, you will find a new section, an additional section proposed, and that would be the addition of Section 10 to Article 2. What I've suggested here is that we post on our website under a link the motions made and approved, motions tabled, and motions that have failed from our board meetings. Our attorney has responded that maybe we don't want to do this type of tracking because it places an additional burden on our agency that is not required. by the CASA or the ordinance. My response to that is that, I definitely don't want to overburden people with unnecessary work, but where this came from my perspective, is that I've felt that it is difficult to track our work. And a lot of our motions are self-governance types of motions. And I thought that I was trying to find some sort of way that we could understand the things that we've done and maintain consistency as the composition of the board changes over time. And so this was my idea for handling that issue. I would be interested in feedback from the CPOA. If it was overly burdensome or if there was a different idea altogether as to how we might keep track of our work from up here more easily. But that was where I was coming from. And so I'm interested in what the board might think about this proposed change. And Director Harness as well.
Director Harness.
Chair Waits, Member Van Deventer. It strikes me as overly burdensome for our agency to do this in this way. There are already minutes produced for the meetings, and I'm not sure how this enhances what's already in the minutes.
I guess my response to that would be ease of reference. If it were available for us to review a link that was motions only, as opposed to clicking on every link for every meeting and then reading through the minutes to find some sort of motion that was made that we're trying to recall as we conduct our business in the future. It seems as though ease of reference really is the goal here. And memorializing plus ease of reference, although, the minutes do memorialize motions. I wouldn't contest that.
Is there any way, Director Harness, just to draw more attention in the minutes to any motions and how they're kind of, I guess, if I go back and look at it, it tells us like how they were voted on. But I'm having a hard time recalling whether or not tabled motions are done the same way. Like if we can say motion is being tabled until the next board meeting. I'm assuming I should probably be looking at you actually for this conversation, Katrina. I mean, would that be difficult to just say like motion tabled and like bold it or something?
It does say motion and tabled till the next meeting.
Okay.
There's a different date put on it.
Yeah, I think what you're asking is to just outline each one of our motions right, so we just click on that and then. Personally, that's like double duty to me.
Yeah, and I'm sensitive to that. I definitely am not trying to create extra work that doesn't serve any purpose. That is, I'm not interested in that. I was thinking of something as simple as like a list.
Like maybe a copy and paste of those things onto a new page at the end of the minutes or something?
Yeah, I think it would be nice if I could go to one place where our motions were consolidated and it just said, bullet points, motion this, motion that, motion whatever. That way we don't have to, I just worry one thing that happens up here is that we lose track, like we'll table something, lose track of it, or we will make a decision and not follow up on it, or we will make a decision and forget we've made it, and it like relates to how we are intending to conduct our business and get things done. And I feel like there are some inefficiencies that might be resolved with something as simple as a list. Okay. I feel like a list is not, I would hope that, I don't know, I don't feel like a list is a crazy amount of extra work, but if everyone disagrees, I could accept that.
Okay.
I don't know.
This is our last round of comments. Please.
Oh yeah, sorry.
No, I think there's enough information and means to access the information as it is. I mean, maybe we could do a cleaner job of highlighting motions or making sure that everything was included. But in this day and age, with everything is electronic, it doesn't necessarily have to be on the website to be accessible. We do have access to SharePoint and shared documents through our own system. So I would suggest that we taking full advantage of the electronic access that we have. If you want to, it's also very searchable. So it seems to me that this is redundant to what is possible within the system that we already have. So I'd say I'd vote against it.
I think that I'm looking at our current minutes right now. Even if it was something as simple as motion made by or whatever, second, and then how it's carried, how the votes went down, just right at the very bottom where it's all in bold, I think would probably handle it rather than being in the narrative. I already put not that everybody doesn't put a lot of time into this, but I think for ease, just something as simple as that might accomplish the same purpose. We can easily go back to our minutes, take a look at the bolded sections just as a refresher.
Yeah, I have a thought. Director Harness, is there a way on SharePoint where we can store a file where we could just go in and click it on and look for the minutes of the meetings, just to keep them all in one place? Is that possible?
They're on the website.
Chair Waits, member of St. John. I mean, I suppose we could store the minutes in SharePoint, but we put the draft minutes up on the website right away, and we send you the link to those draft minutes as soon as they're online. So I'm not sure how moving them to SharePoint would enhance your accessibility.
Okay, let me make this statement. Since we have a whole bunch to go on, my position is that we don't want to duplicate what we have going on. I think the suggestion is to highlight motions and things like that. So I'll take a motion on that, whether.
So I'm just going to propose, so that way we could move through this and then vote on just one document. I'm hoping instead of like all motions, it sounds like everyone, you know, with the exception of me, has a consensus that we reject this proposed change. So I'm just going to note that this change has been rejected.
Okay. Just so we can get through this.
Right. I'm aware of that, yeah. So there will be no inclusion of this new section when we go to vote on this document.
Okay.
Okay, the next change will be, is found in Article 3, Section 1. No officer shall be eligible to immediately succeed himself or herself in the same office. So Board Member Galloway suggested striking this, and our attorney reminds us that this is found in the ordinance, therefore prohibiting striking that language. And so unless anyone contests, I'm going to note that we are rejecting this change.
The only thing that I would say is that was not just that one piece, it was also the March 1st. And the March 1st, we need to do something about the March 1st date, because it's in conflict with when our board meets, and that was a big hurrah this year. And the previous attorneys that we had said that because March 1st was in our policies and procedures, that date could go away, if I'm remembering correctly. And as I look at Director Harness for
we could
refreshing.
I would recommend in that case, that's a good point. I would recommend we change the language to second Thursday of March, because that's when our meeting is, as opposed to March 1st.
I would just say the March board meeting, in
Okay.
case we have any kind of conflict on the second Thursday. Again, not trying to box us in to anything.
Okay, what does everyone think of that? Is
I
that
agree.
I agree.
Because it could be at any time.
The March board meeting.
Could be at any time. Okay. Says first meeting in March.
Oh.
It does before that, but we still have that March 1st at the bottom.
The
So-
chairperson and vice president shall serve at the pleasure of the board until March 1st of the next year or until their successors have been selected.
Right.
So that would continue you until.
Through the month of March.
What
Yeah,
if we were to
okay.
just get rid of, and one would think, but it was a big deal, until their successors have been selected? Can we just get rid of that whole piece and accomplish that same purpose?
serve at the pleasure of POB, strike, POB until strike March 1st through
Until their successors have been selected?
the word there?
Yeah.
So then it reads, shall serve at the pleasure of the POB until their successors have been selected. Does
Is
this
that
do it for
acceptable?
everybody?
I think that leaves out the fact that, elections
No, that's
are
the,
obligated to occur, aren't they?
No,
that's
it's
the previous sentence.
two lines up before it.
Okay, so they're, all right, that's fine,
Okay, so just to clarify,
right.
the language that I will send off if we all vote to approve this will be, the POB shall select the chairperson and vice chairperson at the first meeting in the month of March each calendar year or upon vacancy of an office to fill the remaining term. The chairperson and vice chairperson shall serve at the pleasure of the POB until their successors have been selected. Is that clear for everybody?
Yeah.
Okay,
Good.
moving right along. Okay, the next proposed changes will be found in Article 3, Section 3, subsection A. The POB may create such subcommittees as it deems necessary or desirable in performing, strike the word "the," include the word "authorized," functions, strike "it is authorized to perform," include "provided that membership on such committees shall be limited to POB members." If I'm remembering this correctly, I think this was just an edit coming from our attorney. I don't think it changes really the function of this section in any way. I think it's just making maybe like a cleaner or more cleanly written sentence.
I feel like the subcommittee shall consist of any number of board members fewer than a quorum. I feel like that's in the ordinance as well. Is that accurate?
I don't believe it is.
But I think it's important, because otherwise, if we have subcommittees that meet with a quorum present, now we have an Open Meetings Act problem, which we don't have if we don't have a quorum, so.
That's true.
So it seems to me that language should stay.
Okay.
I would agree with Dr. Cass on that.
Yeah.
I think we should leave that in there.
I agree with Dr. Katz
Okay.
on that, too.
Okay. And do you agree,
I do.
and what do you think?
I do.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll keep the first change, striking the adding authorized. We'll keep the second change, striking it is authorized to perform, and adding provided that membership on each subcommittee shall be limited to POB members. And then we will keep the sentence that subcommittees shall consist, etc. Okay, moving on. Section 3, subsection C, the subcommittee shall elect a chairperson who shall, striking chairperson of a subcommittee shall. I'm not sure what does anyone
Seems
have any?
grammatical, it
Yeah.
seems fine, this change is fine with me.
Does anyone have an objection?
No.
Okay, we'll accept the change. Moving along. Section 3, subsection H. This is a section that I've had an issue with. So this section says the policies and procedures of the POB shall apply to all subcommittees, except as otherwise provided, and except that subcommittees may establish their own time limitations for witnesses. That's about there's some more words, but that's the basic, that's the gist. And I suggest striking this section and replacing it with a different language. And the reason why I make this suggestion is because when we say the policies and procedures of the POB apply to all subcommittees, that I believe that can be interpreted by members of the public as us stipulating to the penalties provided in the OMA, because we are bound by the OMA for our other meetings, and I think that this could be read as saying that we agree that we are bound by the OMA for all of our subcommittee meetings also, when that's not the case. So I suggested, and we certainly don't want people to have arguments that we're volunteering for legal penalties. I think that would be a silly self-inflicted wound, and I think we've also had to deal with it. So I suggest that we replace with some sort of disclaimer, and what I wrote is, While the Open Meetings Act typically does not apply to subcommittees, subcommittees endeavor to act within the spirit of the Open Meetings Act, and as such will post their agendas with 72 hours notice, will allow for 3 minutes of public comment, and will post and record, oh, there's an error there, but will post and record minutes of their meetings. Subcommittees will comply with the Open Meetings Act in all instances where the Open Meeting Act applies. Does anyone have any issues with this suggestion?
I like it.
I like it.
As long as we don't violate it, so we're good.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to note that we're accepting this change. Okay, now, section six, orientation and training. Subsection A, required orientation. Prior to participating in has been struck, voting on case review recommendations in has been added. Okay, let me look at this. Disregard comment A10.
Could you just give it a plain reading of with the changes made?
Yeah, required orientation, it would, if we accept these changes, it reads thusly. A, required orientation. Prior to voting on case review recommendations in any POB meetings, newly appointed members must first, enumerated list. I'm not sure what this is for. This must have been coming from the public.
Well, I think it changes the sense of any kind of participation to specific participation on case
voting,
review.
yeah. Okay, does anyone have any feelings about this?
So those are outlined on page 6? Page, yeah.
Director Harness?
Here.
Chair Waits, Member Vandeventer, if you eliminate participating, then you're narrowing the scope of participation of the board members to only cases when they attain these two levels of training. So I think you would want to keep it as expansive as possible so that they are actually participating in the full board as opposed to simply case review.
Yeah, I think it,
Confusing, I'm sorry. Can you say that one more time?
Yes, Chair Waits, Vice Chair Galloway. If you eliminate the wording participating in and you simply insert case review, then what you're doing is you're narrowing the ability of the new board member to participate in the full meeting once having attained the training that is enumerated. So if you keep it participating, then that's more inclusive and expansive to the new board member, as opposed to simply stating that they would be able to participate in case review. One could read it that then they would not be able to vote on any other motions.
So how would you write the language so that you were limited to not voting on case review cases until you had the training? And that, it seems to me that if there's a change here, that's the purpose of the change. I mean, I'm not the author, so I don't know what.
Well, Chair Waits, Board Member Dr. Cass, I think that this issue was an issue that was when the board was first formed, and I don't believe it's any longer an issue. You can be a fully participating member of the board, including case review, by simply doing the two trainings that are enumerated below. There was a restriction prior because the board wasn't trained and wasn't ready to go. And I believe, as Attorney Gooch has pointed out, as enumerated in the ordinance, these are the two trainings that must take place along with attending one board meeting. So participating, I believe, is broad enough to include case review.
Okay, I agree. Go ahead.
I'm still a little bit confused. I thought that the idea was there were certain things that you could participate in without training. I thought that had been established, and that would not include case review, but it would include the other sort of normal activities of the board. Is that, and so I'm looking for clarification.
Chairman Waits and Member Cass, the if I could just read from the current ordinance, it says that required orientation prior to participation in any meeting of the POB, a newly appointed member must first, A, be trained by the CPOA staff or CPOA legal counsel on CPOA and ADP rules, policies, and procedures, and attend at least one POB meeting as an observer. And so, really, your suggested change is contrary to the ordinance.
And then we're restricting it,
That settles it in my mind.
For me also. Are you guys comfortable with all rejecting this change based on council's advice?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Next. Find my place here. Article 3, Section 8, subsection A. We might want to just go ahead and run this directly through council also, although I do believe we did also run it through Ms. Gooch. This language came from a member of the public. It concerns selection of the executive director. I personally, I would like everyone else to weigh in. I'm personally not comfortable with manipulating this language at this time due to, the overall sensitivity of the issue. However, I do think that if hopefully I'm correct in stating that I think what this is doing is incorporating ordinance language into this section. Although I did not vet that, but I would assume that Ms. Gooch did, although I don't see her comments, so I'm not sure what she thought of that.
Dr. Cass?
I think if that's what it does, is it incorporates ordinance language, then it wouldn't need to be in there. It's already in the ordinance, but it looks to me like there's another purpose that's not stated, and I think it's to put additional restrictions on employment so that someone can make a case that you're not only, the executive director isn't living up to the terms of the ordinance or the terms of these more, specifically stated terms in the policies and procedures, and I don't think that's necessary or desirable. I think if it's stated once in the ordinance, that's enough. And
I agree.
that's it.
Any other, Chantel?
I just don't think it's necessary
Okay. Valerie?
for this document anyway.
Valerie?
I don't know, without information, it's really hard to make a decision by adding and changing things.
Okay.
Okay, so it sounds like, 3 out of,
4. I don't think we need to make a necessary change in this.
okay.
this round.
So yeah, it sounds like 4 out of 5 of us are not desiring to approve this change at this time.
Right.
And so I'm going to let those voices be heard as to this change. I don't think this is the right time to incorporate this type of language. If we're feeling that there are, I have a little bit of a different opinion from Bill. I don't think that there's anything wrong with incorporating our ordinance into this document. I think by and large the ordinance is incorporated into this document, so that seems fine to me. But I just don't think that we need to do this necessarily right now, and I also think that if we want to add it after we've gotten past some benchmarks, then we can take it up next year. So I'm going to note here that we're rejecting this proposed change at this time. Okay, so the next section is section 8, subsection D. Oh, you know what? This one was my idea. The POB shall provide its annual review of the executive director to the city council upon completion. The reason why I added that was because we heard from city councilors that they felt that when, the renewal of our director's contract came before them, that they didn't have any information. And so I thought maybe this would be, I thought that, well, if they see every year a review, then maybe we could avoid that problem at the 3-year mark when it comes up for renewal, but I don't know what you guys might think.
Dr. Cass?
I think in general, that would be a good idea, just for the purpose of informing the council of something that they certainly ought to know. I would agree with this.
My question would be, do we want to put it in here, or do we want to put it in his job description?
Well, it says the
More so.
POB shall provide its annual review, not the executive director should, so I don't think it belongs in his,
Well, this is, I made this language up.
well, I know, but I'm saying like as written, I don't think that this language falls on Ed to do. Now, if we want to change that,
Well, I mean, we could just leave this section out, or we could do what Leonard is suggesting, which is if we want something like this, put it in the contract that Ed should provide it, or sorry, whomever our executive director is should provide it, or we could add this. Director Harness, do you have any opinion on this?
Chair Waits, Board Member Van Deventer, I think given paragraph C, I think paragraph D is appropriate.
Okay.
I think that the personnel committee of the board should send this to city council, should send the results of his review. So I think it's good to have it in here.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree, it's good to have it in there.
Okay. I have noted that we are accepting this change. I also added this next section, which gives the executive director the responsibility of responding to emails and communications from members of the public. And then I put in the caveat here that should not apply to civilian complaints because those have their own process. But this was in response to, this issue has come up a few times, like how are we making sure that we respond to people? The board voted that our executive director would be responsible for replying. However we handle it, I would just like to make sure that we are getting responses out to members of the public. So I suggest this. I don't know what others might think.
It seems to me that this is overly broad. I mean, there are certain things that the director should respond to, but just to respond to communication or requests, replies and communication from members of the public, I don't know when, it seems that that's quite possibly going to overlap with citizen complaints. It's just another form of making a citizen complaint. But then it seems that it's just too broad a request. I mean, there's a formalism to make complaints about and to communicate with the CPOA, and every time some member of the public wants to make a complaint or something, some kind of inquiry, it doesn't have to be the executive director. I don't think we always have to respond to every communication.
I think that this came up as, there's 2 points that I have, came up as a result of emails being sent to @POB and who should be responsible, because there were different board members who were responding, and the board has already taken a vote and determined that the executive director should be responsible for emails that come to @POB. However, the comments that came, I don't know if they came from Ms. Gooch or from you, Chelsea. I think they came from Ms. Gooch about being on vacation and accounting for weekends and vacations in the 48 hours, I think raises another point. Our executive director, if they're on a 2-week vacation, should not be responsible for responding to those emails. They're on vacation. So I think that the language could be edited to say the executive director or his designee, their designee in his or her absence. That way it frees them up a little bit, but I don't think that the question is to be had anymore, whether or not the executive director is responsible for sending those emails. We've already taken action on that.
Okay. So what if it's written like this? The executive director or designee is responsible for sending responsive replies and emails, maybe just responsive replies, to communications from members of the public, unless the communication is a civilian complaint, responses shall be sent. Should we just get rid of that altogether? Responses
Yeah, I
shall,
think you should. Just get rid of all that.
all the second sentence?
Mhm.
Do you remember if we voted a time frame on that as well?
No, we didn't.
And then the only other thing that I would say in response, just real quick, is I would say in their absence, or for the board to vote on whether or not we're comfortable with the executive director not being the person to respond to those emails and just saying, hey, you know, community outreach person, this is now your job. Because I thought we were pretty clear about it being executive director, so. I'll leave it there.
I have another thought. You know, as I look at this, I wonder if we're putting a Director Harness in a box, because there's a possibility
Board Member
that
St. John, could you turn your microphone on,
there-
please?
there might be a possibility that an email that he receives does not warrant a response. And so we're putting him in a box if we're putting this, because whoever sends this can say, but look at this, you're not complying with this.
Well, I mean, I would think that the executive director's response could be as simple as, your message has been received, you know, thank you for your, yeah, not, it doesn't have to be,
I would like to know, what's the weather in Tampa? And I'm going to send you an email.
Chair Waits, I have some issues with this one. First, I think that I understand the intention that the board wants one communicator for @POB emails, but that is not described here in paragraph E. Beyond that, Member St. John makes a very valid point that there are emails that we receive, if not on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, that do not warrant a response.
Could a response, an auto response, be set up so that it still allows you to filter out, and would that accomplish the same thing that we're trying to do? So that technically everybody would receive that response, but you could have the freedom to determine which ones needed to be addressed in case of what's the weather in Tampa emails come through?
Chair Waits, Vice Chair Galloway, well, I suppose, but then that would mean every time you email me, you're going to get an automated response, because it would have to be set up for my email account. And so every email that I get would have to be set up for an automated response, and then for me to respond to the email.
Are we doing that anyway? Like, is that the road we're going down because of the IPRA stuff?
That's for board member emails?
Got it.
Yes, not for agency, no.
well, I don't know what the solution is, but I do know that we've taken a vote that I think was, and this again, it like goes to my point of memorializing our motions in a way that is more easily referenceable. But, you know, we've taken a vote that I felt like was very similar to this. And so in my view, this is already the lay of the land. And so I don't think it really changes anything except for these, you know, whether or not I delete this like 48 hours, I mean, which would be fine or something like that. But somehow we need to address this, because I feel as a professional body, we need to ensure that we are responding to communications, and I don't think we're doing a sufficient job of that. I mean, obviously we do it with the civilian complaints, And so that's like, you know, the first box we needed to tick off, but we also need to address the other types of communications we get. And so I don't know how we best do that. Maybe it's not in this document, but maybe if you would like, I could bring it up for another formal agenda item. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Something.
Chair Waits, a member Vandeventer, I would ask you, how is it that we have not been responsive? I would take issue with that.
And just, again, for clarification as to what that vote was all about, because that was, if I remember correctly, my motion, that was because board members were responding not because Director Harness necessarily was not, or the CPOA was not. It was just so that there would be one voice that comes instead of multiple, and making sure that it would be done by one person.
And the issue is emails directed to the POB.
Right.
It's not
Specific.
emails directed to individuals or board members or to the CPOA. So that's my point about how paragraph E is drafted. And the motion that you passed was that I would respond on behalf of the POB to POB emails that directed and had questions. And that still stands, and that still happens. If you want to memorialize that here, I don't believe that paragraph E accomplishes that.
As written, but I think putting in there the changes of the @POB email, and then I still would advocate for in the executive director's absence, somebody else be designated to do that. Those would be the two changes that I would make to E.
Okay.
And maybe not boxing in your 48 hours, but I do think a time frame is appropriate.
Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of take like an informal survey to see who supports some type of language on this subject and who doesn't. And if there's more support for something like this, then we'll write it really quickly. And if there's less support, then we'll reject it. Does that sound okay to everybody? Okay, so what do you think? You want to reject it?
I would like to remove E, paragraph E entirely.
Okay,
I would like to keep it based on our previous vote.
okay. What do you think, Chair Waits?
I think we need to delete it, personally. I don't like the 48 hours period.
Yeah, I also agree that we need to delete it because I don't want to put Director Harness in a box.
Okay, so we are rejecting my proposed section E. Article 4, procedures. Section 1, subsection A. Ms. Gooch added some language, I think, to just make this section more malleable because the use of force policy is getting updated. Does anyone have an issue with accepting this change?
I'm good. I'm for it.
Is there a reason this is in? Is there a reason this is in our procedures?
Yeah, because these are cases we review. These are definitions.
Just definitions.
Yeah, okay.
I'm good with it.
Yeah, I'm good, it's fine.
Chair Waits, might it be more appropriate to reference APD use of force policies as
Somewhere in there.
as the defining terms?
Director Harness, could you suggest language at this? Can I put you on the spot? How would you write it? Because I want to be done with this hopefully at the end of this meeting and not have to take it back for more editing.
How about use of force and its procedures are defined by Albuquerque Police Department policies numbered 2-52 through 2-57?
Use of force policies and their procedures are defined as And then you list 252 through
252 through 2-57.
That's what they're numbered as now, but
Mhm.
is there a possibility of that changing, in a year?
I suppose there's I'm sorry, yeah, Chair Waits, Vice Chair Galloway. I suppose, yes, they could change the numbering, so.
Just use of force
Use of force
policies?
policies
And,
as currently adopted by,
and I presume that would apply to both paragraphs A and B.
yes. That would get us over the hump of having to go back and define levels 1, 2, and 3 for force as adopted.
Okay, so tell me one more time how you guys would like this to read, so I can get it written down. Use of force. Did you have it, Bill?
Could you repeat your,
Sorry, did you have it, Dr. Cass?
No.
And
I'm
I'm
going
not
to
a
put the
very,
onus back on the director.
Use of force is defined by Albuquerque Police Department. Use of force policies 2-52 through 2-57.
oh, I thought we worked on it after that.
I think that it's good enough for now. I mean, if they change their policies numbers, then we can adjust.
Well, then
Yeah,
there's no
but-
point in rewriting it really at all, right? Because,
I just think it's unnecessary to put us in that position when we can just say APD's use of force policies.
Well, I guess the problem is that any more specific? I mean,
Then
than enumerating the policies, and then when they change, you recognize that they've changed. I mean,
Well,
it,
in theory, the use of force policy title itself isn't going to change. It didn't change previously.
But
But the
there's-
just
numbering
leave the
did.
numbers out. I think I
That's,
see
that's
where
what
Ed
I'm
is going.
saying. Just leave the numbers out.
So use of force, so could read like this, use of force policies, as defined by APD in their standard operating procedures.
Yeah.
What do you guys think about that?
Yeah, that's pretty.
okay, good.
Chair Waits, there was a suggestion from a member of the force team from APD that it not be use of force, but force policies, so that it is inclusive of show of force as well. So instead of use of force, it would be force policies.
I accept that.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay. I think I would like to write it like this then, force policies clause, including use of force. I feel like it's important to spell that out just because that is the type of case that we review. As defined by. What do you guys think of that?
I'm good.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. And then we just don't have the numbers in there, but we have the language that doesn't need to be edited every year, hopefully.
All use of force, APD here. Okay.
And again, I'm sorry. I know that we go over these, that this is what we review, but why is this in our procedures? And for example, review of any internal affairs cases not defined in here? I'm sorry to
I mean, if you want to add, I need to be done with this project.
I know you
So
do.
If you
I'm-
want to add, if you want to add more definitions for types of things we review, I think we can do that next year. But I think the answer to your question of why are these in here is because we are defining in our procedures what these types of cases are that we're reviewing as a board. Right, like we review civilian complaints, we review use of force cases, there's the definition of what a use of force case is. We review serious use of force cases, there's the definition. So we could always add more definitions, but I don't think that we would take definitions out because these phrases occur in other parts of the procedure. So
Okay.
then when you see this phrase elsewhere in this document and you're wondering what exactly it means, you refer to this definition up here and that's
Okay.
answered for you.
All right, then I'm gonna leave it alone.
Okay, well, just keep that memory for next year's review, okay? That you can lead the charge on. Okay. Article 4, Section 5, Order of Business. The POB shall consider order of business in the following order. This one is mine again. I propose we remove the Pledge of Allegiance and re-enumerate.
Did we vote on this one too previously, or did we just discuss it?
No,
We have never
so
voted.
it's up for discussion.
Okay, are we going in order?
Yeah.
Okay,
Go
I'm
ahead.
ready. I have given this a lot of thought and consideration to this, and I feel a debate is not appropriate at this meeting. My thoughts are we leave the Pledge of Allegiance on our agenda. By doing this, we respect everybody's rights to stand, say the Pledge of Allegiance, or not to stand, or to stand and not say it, which I've seen at other meetings. In this regard, it gives one the option to sit or stand without completely removing the option of being able to perform the Pledge of Allegiance.
Any other comment?
What was that?
You have a comment?
Oh, no, I was looking at you for what your thoughts were. Did you have?
I'm just going down the.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
I'm for taking it out.
I would keep it.
I would keep it. Don't worry.
Okay. We are keeping the pledge.
Can we take a knee? No, no.
What was that?
No.
Yeah, but I think one might want to. Okay. Section, okay, Article 5, Section S, subsection 1. Oh, this is, just disregard that. That's not a language change. Section H, subsection 1. This is Joanne's, board member Fine's suggestion that we change officer to APD employee. That seems like it makes sense as long as we have the jurisdiction for that, right?
Chair Waits, member Van Deventer, yes, we do have jurisdiction over all APD personnel. However, I do believe that the findings language is a directly stated in the settlement agreement.
So officers is
Correct.
the language?
Correct.
But it doesn't sound like it's necessarily in conflict to use the word, to say APD employee instead.
So can we use both words?
Chair Waits, member Van Deventer, I don't believe it's in conflict either. And certainly, if the board chooses to make those changes, we will make those changes, and then the monitor can tell us yes or no.
I think APD employee would cover officer. I don't think we need both.
Mhm. Any other comments?
Nope.
Okay. Well, then I am noting that we accept the change. Broaden the language to APD employee. All right, that brings us to administratively closed. Both board member Fine and I wondered whether or not we should expand the definition, which would include our newest criteria, which is we have created a standard that says that essentially that if allegations cannot be minimally substantiated, that a case can then be administratively closed. And so I don't think there is any additional administratively closed categories we have that aren't in here. It's just that one. I'm wondering, and Joanne and board member Find is wondering if we should include that in this section. What are the board's thoughts?
You have that language?
Not aside from of what I've just stated, no. I haven't written it down.
Chair Waits, Board Member Dr. Cass, since it was my development for minimally substantiating the allegations in the complaint, I believe that that language would be covered by a lack of information in the complaint. And I think that that's broad enough.
All right.
I don't really agree, but I also am very happy to defer the matter to the rest of the board. So whatever you guys are thinking is
I think
acceptable to me.
I'll go along with that recommendation that it's already covered by lack of information.
I would too.
And Chair Waits and Member Van Deventer, yes, and realize that the burden for reopening an administratively closed case is less than a case that has been investigated. So any new information, a case can be reopened if it's an administratively closed case. So if new, more substantial information was to come forward, then we could commence an investigation, as opposed to having a findings where then the complainant is restricted to meeting the burden as defined under the ordinance for an appeal.
Okay, so we are going to reject my proposal that we add additional language into subsection 6. Moving on to subsection K, I think we should all accept these changes. It just updates the IA Bureau to the IA Division.
Okay.
That's what they're calling themselves.
Does that include both pieces of IA? Okay,
Okay.
all right.
Moving along to section 2. This is language from Ms. Gooch that reflects the conversation we just had about the use of force definitions. And if you guys are okay with this, I will just make sure that the language here tracks the language we've used previously. Okay. Section 3, investigation protocol, subsection B1. This is again change from board member fine, change officer to APD employee.
We'll keep that for consistency with our other change? I mean, that we decided to go to test this, right? By putting employee in there.
Yeah,
So
I think,
should we, let's stay consistent.
okay. Is everyone fine with that?
I don't think we
Okay.
need to discuss.
So we're accepting Joanne's, board member Fine's proposed change. Next page, section B. I don't know that we should make any change to this at this
agree.
time. It's just not, it's not ripe for change. Maybe next year, hopefully. Is everyone okay with that, rejecting this?
Yeah.
Okay. Section 5, POB review. Oh, these are mine. I added 2 sections in here. This concerns cases that come before the board. It says, the way it's written currently says the POB shall review the findings and recommendations prepared by the executive director and do one of these 3 things: approve as proposed, approve other findings, or defer action on the matter to allow for further investigation or analysis. I have run into the issue on the case review committee that I've wanted to return some work that was difficult to do because these 3 sections were limiting. And so I proposed adding these 2. Return the findings correspondence to the CPOA for editing, proofreading, or other requested improvements to the draft. And then section 5, would just make it so that, well, it says findings correspondence return to the CPOA pursuant to this subsection pursuant to subsection 4 or this subsection will be returned to the POB for review of the final work product pursuant to, it should say section 5, or I'll write that more clearly. So yeah, I just wanted to make it so that, you know, if there were like a lot of like errors or problems or, you know, whatever in a findings, that we could send it back.
Could you accomplish that on just implementing 4 and not 5?
Well, 5 is asking for it to be returned so that they can see it again before it goes out.
Yeah, so the idea would be we could return something to the CPOA, ask them to make a change, and then they bring it back for us to vote on, instead of we ask them to make a change and then they make the change and send it off without us
Okay.
seeing it first.
Okay, that's the intent, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Oh, I like this. It's good.
Okay.
okay. Any other thoughts?
I'm good with it.
Okay.
Chair Waits. First off, I think that the POB review is defined in the ordinance. Secondarily, these paragraphs 4 and 5 are perhaps the duties of the case review committee, if there. Third, I think that there's already too much mission creep from the POB into the agency's work and the purview of what the agency's supposed to be doing. And so I would ask that you would reject these 2 paragraphs.
I know over the past, we've had issues with wording, documentation, the way they write the reports, those type of things. I think this is what you're talking about now. I think we should have a process that, hey, Executive Director Harness, this doesn't fit. It's not right, and you know, we want to correct it. You know, we should have that opportunity to do that. So I think we should. Personally, I think we should keep it in there.
I agree.
May I?
Sure.
I would agree with that, but I do think that you have a good point. That's probably appropriate for case review committee rather than the board.
Probably so. Well, yeah, okay.
Right.
I agree with that. That's the piece that I'm talking about. Being on the past case review, I know we had issues with those type of things. And we always said, okay, Director Harness, might want to change the wording, or we just suggest a different approach or something else like that. I think in what you're saying, the case review, having that, being able to make those changes is the way to go. Maybe not so much here, but as part of conversation,
Yeah.
the case review to do that. So I could go either way with that, either keep it or not keep it.
For clarification, could you explain what the normal process is and what happens if you have something that's suggested here that gets returned? It means, what's the substance of these changes that we're dealing with, and what process do you go through to do this now?
Chair Waits, Board Member Dr. Cass. This is typically an issue that comes up in the case review subcommittee, where perhaps there may be some confusion and the letter is not specific enough, or the board member doesn't believe that there's enough there to make a decision. And so on the occasion when it happens, it is rarely about the substance of the case, and it's about grammatical errors or a perceived tone of the letter, and I think that what is laid out in the ordinance provides for oversight while not doing the agency's work on a day-to-day basis. If any board member at any point in time does not believe that the findings are correct, then what is outlined is then that has to be based upon a review of the investigative file. And so I think that what the board is tasked with reviewing is whether or not the allegations are correct. And while, yes, clarity perhaps and some suggestions for rephrasing, that's one thing. And we've cooperated with that by editing some letters. I don't want to set, what I'm trying to get away from, essentially the board doing the agency's business with the investigations and the findings. And that's what I'm trying to set up as a barrier between the two.
Okay. I don't disagree with you, and knowing, being on the case review board, the issues that we had were issues of how we presented that case, not the substance of the case, is how we wrote it up, whether it be wording or temperament or whatever. Those were the issues. Now, with that being said, maybe it doesn't need to be here. Maybe it needs to be in the case review committee instead of, I don't know. What do you all think?
I think it needs to be in here, that's why I put it in here.
Oh, okay.
I mean, this is like, so just bear in mind, I guess I would ask you guys to bear in mind that these are the sections that the case review committee are using, because the oversight board has delegated, essentially all of its case review duties to the case review committee. So this language is for that committee. I don't think the argument that, it's for case review, so don't put it in here works. This is case review's policies, essentially. I certainly want it in there as a safeguard, because, I respect the CPOA and I think they're doing really good work, but in the instance where I have an issue and I want something to be fixed, and that's happening less and less, and we're working, I think, together and having a much improved work product. But I feel like for a board member who's not paid, contributing a substantial amount of time to reviewing these cases, to reach a conclusion where we have that there be some sort of issue that just can't be addressed because of an artificial failure or arbitrary failure to allow for a little bit of editing here and there, that just that rubs me the wrong way. I don't like running into that problem. I certainly don't think that these two sections create like an enormous, like we're going to be sending all of the CPOA's work back to them. I think it only happens here and there, but when there is, and I'm not the only one who's had these issues, other people have had them too. And I do think that we should, if we're all reviewing this work product, be able to collaborate on it to some degree. So I would really like it in here.
Chair Waits and Member Vandeventer, when has the agency not cooperated with whatever suggestions you've made on a level beyond questioning the findings? Okay. We're already cooperating and making changes and doing adjustments. So I'm not sure why there needs to be some enforcement mechanism, which I still believe
This isn't an enforcement mechanism.
well,
There are no
what it-
penalties. This is just putting procedures in place, and so that way it's not an ad hoc decision made every single time this comes up. We have a procedure, we know how to handle it every time this issue arises.
So
That's
Chair-
what these are
so-
for.
So Chair Waite's member Vandeventer, then if there are no penalties here, and then I refuse to comply, what would happen?
I suppose it could be reflected on your performance review. It's
That-
not an
that seems to
enforcement
be-
mechanism.
That seems to
these
be an
are-
enforcement mechanism to me.
All right. Dr. Gaddis?
It seems to me that at most, returning the correspondence to the CPOA for editing is already happening on a cooperative basis. From what I've heard here, that is happening already. That you take the recommendations that the case review committee makes for editing, for any number of changes, and you generally make those. So the thing that seems to be at issue here is whether you then return these editing changes back to the committee for further review. And that seems to me to be a matter of trust. I mean, if we can't work out ongoing cooperative relationship for making changes and then trusting that those changes are made, that seems to me that we're making a lot of extra work for ourselves and just creating a division within the agency. So I would think that 4 is already in there in terms of practice. 5 is what I would object to, because that's the check up to see if the changes that were asked for were actually made.
Chantel?
Okay, so I still think that this is primarily for case review, and I'm comfortable with your argument that this section governs case review. Would also argue, though, and just slide it in there not to start a discussion, that the definitions we were talking about probably also belong in this section, but that's something else completely. I'm going to go on ahead and say, yeah, let's keep this in here for 2 reasons. One, if I disagree with the letter, the return correspondence, but the case review committee has approved it, I would like the opportunity to say such as well, or any other board member. But also, because this isn't an exercise in trust between Director Harness and the board, this is for the executive director of the agency and the board. And I think that we need to take a step back from making any decisions that are about this particular board or this particular CPOA as it's set up, and do it as a whole. And I think that's probably a good practice to have, should it ever be necessary to have it in writing. Anyway, thank you. Mhm.
Yeah, I believe we should have this in here after hearing your argument. And like you said, it's not about trust, it's about the CPOA. We will all come and go, but at least that this will stay here, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, this really is just about procedure. I mean, this whole thing is already a document largely memorializing the mechanisms, and that's what this is for.
Right.
Chair
So
Waits,
let's-
did you have?
No, let's move it on. And
Okay, so I understand that we have 3 people accepting, 1 rejecting, and then where did you stand?
I will keep it in there,
Okay.
for the simple reason, we're going beyond what's happening now. I'm not looking at process, I'm looking at process more so than the people, and I truly understand Director Harness's complies to what our needs are right now, but going past that, we have nothing in place for that, so.
Okay,
All right, so we'll keep it in there.
so we are accepting those.
Mhm.
Okay, we only have like a few left.
Chair Waits and Member Vandeventer, I need to leave now. I would like to make a comment that it would be unusual for a board to vote on this level of policy change at the first reading and discussion meeting. I know Chair Waits and Member Vandeventer, you are really anxious to close out this project, but with the number of sort of wording changes that need to happen to a final policy document to be voted on, so that I think that the board can have a clear and deliberative process, that another turn on a draft should be done and presented at the next board meeting, so that the board is really clear about what they're voting on as a final policy package. That would be my recommendation.
Thank you, I
Thank you.
appreciate that. For the sake of time, and we're gonna take your suggestion, I mean, we could be here till 10 o'clock trying to get this thing done.
I think we only have 3 left.
Yeah, we don't have much more to go.
So, I mean, we can at least get through the
The
talking
initial
portion,
part, okay.
and then I can put the final thing together, and then I can attach
Okay.
it to the next, and then you guys can read the final language.
All right.
Okay.
So let's
So-
move on to our next one.
Page, oh yeah, okay, so page 17, number 6, section B, 1 through 3. Oh yeah, oh good, we can just skip this one. This one is moot. Sorry. Please turn to page 19, section L. Within 20 days of receipt of the POB's decision, the chief shall notify. Oh, this is just a question Board Member Fine had. I don't think it really is for this particular venue. It's not a proposed change. Please move to page 21.
Director Harden?
Yes, Chair Waits, I would recommend that you eliminate this, because I'm not sure how your policies and procedures can dictate the chief's actions.
Yeah, we can, there was another area in these like that too, but I just didn't mess with it. We can strike, does anyone have an objection to striking that?
Nope.
I mean, we don't have any governance
Thank you,
over them.
Director
Okay,
Harden.
so we'll strike to section J. Okay,
Nothing on 20?
Right? Are we on the same page?
oh yeah, sorry.
Okay, all right. I was on 19.
Yeah, 19, L,
19 now.
that's going.
Okay.
Please turn to page 21. Look at section C.
Hmm.
Joanne asks if we should do this. Oh, yes, please disregard this. It's not for this venue. This is just a comment. Oh, and actually, I think you can disregard the next one also. It was, I had some comments on section 13 for reporting, but I just don't remember my reasoning or intent or what I was thinking. It maybe just made no sense to begin with. I can't piece it back together. I don't think there's any change to be made there, so sorry for distracting you with it. And then that's it, we're actually done. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Can we go on ahead and make a motion, though, that you recompile, or anybody else, if you don't want to do this, if somebody else wants to take this, recompile this and present a final draft for review and voting next board meeting?
Yes, and I would like to vote on the document as a whole, that way we don't have to redo this.
Chair Waits, one step backward. 13, Member Vandeventer, I think your questions were probably that this report as outlined is in conflict with the CASA.
What page?
Page 21, reporting. The CASA outlines what is supposed to be included in the semi-annual report and what is delineated in your policies and procedures are in conflict.
Oh, we want to put that.
In the changes, would you clarify, that in the proposed changes are in conflict, or the current language is in conflict?
The current language is in conflict.
Okay, so I would be willing to reconcile. I can easily go look at the CASA and reconcile whatever is askew in our current policies. I mean, I'll probably ask Director Harness to just point me to it, but I can also make sure I officially reconcile them. Did you want to tell us what it is?
Chair Waits, Board Member Vandeventer, I believe they're delineated in the comments. CASA paragraph 292, A through H.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H.
And they are
Okay.
directly tracked in the ordinance as well.
Okay. Is everyone okay with me reconciling?
So that whole thing,
So essentially, it's putting in the language that
It's using the
You-
ordinance language as opposed to the language we're using right now.
But it's the language that you've actually got here.
Right, it sounds like it,
Right.
yeah. Okay.
CASA.
Oh, CASA language, sorry, yeah. Okay. Okay. So now I would like to move forward with a plan where we hopefully, where you allow me to make all of the changes, accepting the changes we have accepted, rejecting the changes we have not accepted, and making a couple of rewrites, and then emailing this document to the board, an email to which you may not reply because it would violate the Open Meetings Act most likely, but that you will review before the next board meeting so that we can see the final product on which we're voting. Does that sound good to everybody?
Is that a motion?
I make that motion.
I second.
A motion and second that we review and accept or receive a final copy for our next meeting. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposed. Thank you. Okay, all righty. Report
Yes.
on observation from NACO. Let's be real brief with that. I think we, you know, go ahead.
Okay, the NACO conference was September the 30th through October the 4th in Florida. This is my first conference, and it was a great opportunity to meet others who serve on oversight boards. This also gives you the opportunity to share ideas and also hear their challenges. And I wanted to bring a popular discussion that I had with others was recruiting new board members. But I will have to say that they were excited to hear that we had an outreach committee who's working on a plan to bring qualified board members.
Okay, thank you.
So a couple of things. I believe it was Tampa's ordinance and mission statement included language that says to investigate topics of interest in the community, which I really liked. That way it broadened things for them a little bit. New Orleans and their EPIC program, which I understand from Director Harness was presented here fairly recently to APD. I think that is a really, would be well worth our time and the city's time to look into. Austin, something that they had said, we are not oversight of a department in the police department, for example, IA, Internal Affairs. We are oversight of the police department as a whole, which is something that I've mentioned in the past that I would like to see us do, particularly with the training academy. I would like us to be more involved with the training academy, and I know that that's a little outside of our scope, but I think that it would be beneficial to be in on that. And then Miami, the group out of Miami said something about the community as our constituency. And the only thing that I would add to that is I did a ride-along this week with Officer Sharon Saavedra, and she said something that hasn't been brought up yet in the past year, that our APD officers, seems intuitive, are also members of our community, but I think that that's not something that we as a whole typically think about, and I think that that's a good thing to keep in mind as well.
Okay, thank you.
I had a lot of things to say, but I'm going to cut it short, and I'll focus on one thing, and that is the NACO has put together, I think, over a series of years, what the features of an effective police oversight body are, and they have a list now which starts with independence, adequate funding, access to critical pieces, rapport, authority or ample authority, ability to review police policies, community stakeholder support, and transparency. It was interesting because I had the networking lunch. I sat at a table with the relatively new director of the Chicago Civilian Oversight Police, Civilian Oversight Agency, and the director of the Baltimore agency. And the contrast is really great in terms of the resources that they have, which gets to the, to item 2 in the NACO list. But for example, the Chicago department in Chicago has, I think, about a $13 million budget and 140 employees to oversee the police department of 12,000 people. Baltimore, and that represents about a little bit over 1% of the police budget. We, of course, have a 0.5% of the police budget, but Baltimore has an actual budget of about $400,000, which is 1/10 of the Baltimore Police Department budget. And they really, you can see where the problems associated with having insufficient resources are then. But it kind of puts us in perspective. I mean, we're right in the middle of that, and and so there's a number of things that you could go through this list where I think Albuquerque has done well, and some places, of course, where we could make improvement. But I also spent a lot of time at the corrections track, and I found that very interesting because NACO now is moving into that area of considering the bigger picture of oversight of corrections as well as police departments. So that's all.
All right, thank you.
I enjoyed my time, and I look forward to attending next year.
Okay. I think you said it best there. So let's move on to item C, juvenile confidentiality recommendation. I think that's yours, Chelsea.
Yes, thank you. So you have the letter here. This is just a letter of recommendation for inclusion of a new section into the juvenile SOP of APD's SOP 2-22. And so I am asking that the board approve this recommendation, which basically just asks them to incorporate New Mexico's confidentiality of records statute for juveniles. It's NMSA 1978-32A-2-32, which prohibits disclosure of records pertaining to a child. I note in here that that this statute does tend to get violated from time to time, and I think the reason why that is occurring is probably likely because they don't have a policy on it. So it's a blind spot that I think they could easily rectify, and I think that this policy is headed towards OPA for an annual review. I'm not positive, but it seems like that must be the case. And so really I'm asking that we send this to the chief and that we CC the Office of Policy Analysis, or also send it to them, because our ordinance says, that if the chief receives a recommendation, that he should reply within 45 days. I don't think that makes sense in this instance because we're asking for OPA to do it. But I did just put in here that, like, hey, if this policy comes back through OPA and you haven't done anything with this recommendation, then please respond then. Because I think it'll take more than 45 days naturally because it's not even there yet. Okay. That's it.
All right.
I have some comments, and actually I have some corrections as well, and that is, in the language of this, there's a couple of small things, but most of it is centered around taking out the sentence that says violating this statute is a misdemeanor offense and may open the department up to costly civil liability. I think we can deal with that issue and assume that APD is operating in good faith and that they recognize that when they violate misdemeanors and that violating statutes is an offense. So I would leave that sentence out and deal with the subject by just going back to the first paragraph. And if you read the second sentence, it says, I would change it to failure to comply with New Mexico's confidentiality laws is in violation of the statute, which prohibits all disclosures of records pertaining to a child, including records relating to child's delinquent offenses, is a misdemeanor offense. And just add that simple clause at the end of the sentence to take care of the removal of the next sentence. Then the last thing I would do is, since as Member Van Deventer mentioned, the chief really doesn't have the 45-day period isn't applicable here. I would leave out that last sentence as well.
Okay. Chantel, you have any comment on
No.
Okay.
I think it's fine as written, but I do agree with Dr. Cass to remove the last sentence.
Okay.
I probably would go ahead and go with the violating the statute as a misdemeanor. I think that I'd probably lose that. Sorry, change my mind.
You can't do that.
I'm sorry.
I'm just kidding. Any other comment? Let's, any comments on the changes, Chelsea? Since,
No, I mean, I think I'm just going to,
or suggested changes?
yeah, I'm just going to move that we send it off. And, you know, if I get a second, I do, and if I don't, I don't. I would like to move that it be, I guess my comment is that I think the proposed changes are really minor. And you know, I did give you guys the opportunity to send me those proposed changes so that this could be a finished product at this meeting, which you guys agreed to. And so I feel a little bit like you missed the boat based on our conversation. And so I just feel like since it is so minor, I would like to just go ahead and make the motion that we send it forward.
And I think that that's fair. If I might respond to that, I'm sorry.
It's a motion on the floor.
We don't have a second.
You second?
I second.
Okay.
Okay. Discussion,
Discussion,
may I?
please.
I think that that's fair, and I think that it's not anything, the changes that I made are not anything that I would have brought up that it's nothing I would have thought about. And my suspicion is that the knowledge came from an outside source, and I would have appreciated that information ahead of time as well, because I think that this should have been done prior to our being here. So I
Okay.
think that's fair, and I think that your point is fair as well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. All right, there's a motion and second that we send the letter as written. Any more comments? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Dr. Cass? No? All opposed?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. So you have 3-2. Okay. It passes.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
All right, Juvenile Open Meeting Act Resolution. Was that, we had that Open Meeting Act?
I don't know what that is.
Okay.
Chair Waits, you have the resolution in your package, and it's something that needs to be done annually. And so to display to the public that this board is
Okay.
going to be moving forward and will always conduct its business in accordance with the Open
Okay.
Meetings Act.
Okay, well, one, I'd like to not table this. I'd like to have the opportunity to review this. Or we all have that opportunity. Can we do that?
Has
We
it
don't have to,
changed?
we don't have to take action on it tonight, right?
I believe, I'm sorry, Chair Waits, I believe you adopted it last year in November. It is something that's done annually. This has been drafted by your council
Okay.
and reviewed by your council, so it's been prepared for you to read into the record so that you can just adopt it and move forward.
Okay. So
I
we
would,
can,
I'm sorry.
go ahead.
I would move that we go on ahead and read this into the record and adopt it.
I would second that motion.
Okay. Any other comments? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, you want to read it?
Sure.
I don't have my glasses.
All right, Albuquerque Police Oversight Board Resolution number blank. Do we have anything for that, Director Harness? No? Okay. Whereas the Albuquerque Police Oversight Board met in regular session in the City Council chambers on October 11th, 2018 at 5 p.m. as required by law, and whereas Section 10-15-1B of the Open Meetings Act, NMSA 1978, Sections 10-15-1 to 4, states that except as may be otherwise provided in the Constitution or the provisions of the Open Meetings Act, all meetings of a quorum of members of any board, council, commission, administrative, adjunctory body, or other policymaking body of any state or local public agency held for the purpose of formulating public policy, discussing public business, or for the purpose of taking action within the authority of or the delegated authority of such body are declared to be the public meetings open to the public at all times. And whereas any meeting subject to the Open Meetings Act at which the discussion or adoption of any proposed resolution, rule, regulation, or formal action occurs shall be held only after reasonable notice to the public. And whereas Sections 10-15-1D of the Open Meetings Act requires the Police Oversight Board to determine annually what constitutes reasonable notice of its public meetings. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Police Oversight Board that 1, all regular meetings shall be held in the City Council chambers for the City of Albuquerque on the second Thursday of every month at 5 p.m. or as indicated in meeting notice. 2, the agenda for regular meetings will be posted at least 72 hours prior to the meeting at the offices of the Civilian Police Oversight Agency and on the Civilian Police Oversight Agency's website at www.cabq.gov/CPOA. 3, notice of regular meetings other than those described in paragraph 2 will be given 10 days in advance of the meeting date. The notice will include a copy of the agenda or information on how a copy of the agenda may be obtained. If not included in the notice, the agenda will be available at least 72 hours before the meeting and posted on the Civilian Police Oversight Agency's website at www.cabq.gov/CPOA. 4, special meetings may be called by the chairman or a majority of the members upon 3 days' notice. The notice for a special meeting shall include an agenda for the meeting or information on how a copy of the agenda may be obtained. The agenda will be available at least 72 hours before the meeting and posted on the Civilian Police Oversight Agency's website at www.cabq.gov/CPOA. 5, emergency meetings will be called only under unforeseen circumstances that demand immediate action to protect health, safety, and property of citizens or to protect the public body from substantial financial loss. The Police Oversight Board will avoid emergency meetings whenever possible. Emergency meetings may be called, by the chairman or a majority of the members with 24 hours prior notice unless threat of personal injury or property damage requires less notice. The notice for all emergency meetings shall include an agenda for the meeting or information on how the public may obtain a copy of the agenda. Within 10 days of taking action on an emergency matter, the Police Oversight Board will notify the Attorney General's office. 6, for the purposes of regular meetings, notice requirements are met if notice of the date, time, and place and agenda is posted at the offices of the Civilian Police Oversight Agency and on the Civilian Police Oversight Agency's website at cabq.gov/CPOA. 7, copies of the written notice shall also be mailed to those broadcast stations licensed by the Federal Communications Commission and the newspapers of general circulation that have made a written request for notice of public meetings. 8, for the purpose of special meetings and emergency meetings, notice requirements are met if notice of the date, time, place, and agenda is posted at the offices of the Civilian Police Oversight Agency and on the Civilian Police Oversight Agency's website at www.cabq.gov/CPOA. Telephone notice also shall be given to those broadcast stations licensed by the Federal Communications Commission and newspapers of general circulation that have made a written request for notice of public meetings. 9, in addition to the information specified above, all notices shall include the following language. If you are an individual with a disability who is in need of a reader, amplifier, qualified sign language interpreter, or any other form of auxiliary aid or service to attend or participate in the hearing or meeting, please contact Katrina Segala at 924-3770, at least 1 week prior to the meeting or as soon as possible. Public documents, including the agenda and minutes, can be provided in various accessible formats. Please contact Katrina Segala at 924-3770 if a summary or other type of accessible format is needed. The Police Oversight Board may close a meeting to the public only if the subject matter of a discussion or action is accepted from the open meetings requirement under sections 10-15-1H of the Open Meetings Act. A, if any meeting is closed during an open meeting, such closure shall be provided by a majority vote of the quorum of the Police Oversight Board taken during the open meeting. The authority for the closed meeting and the subjects to be discussed shall be stated with reasonable specificity in the motion to close. And the vote of each individual member on the motion to close shall be recorded in the minutes. Only those subjects specified in the motion may be discussed in the closed meeting. B, if a closed meeting is conducted when the Police Oversight Board is not in an open meeting, the closed meeting shall not held? Is that a typo? Be held until public notice appropriate under the circumstances stating the specific provision of law authorizing the closed meeting, and the subjects to be discussed with reasonable specificity is given to the members and to the general public. C, following the completion of any closed meeting, the minutes of the open meeting that was closed, or the minutes of the next open meeting if the closed meeting was separately scheduled, shall state whether the matters discussed in the closed meeting were limited only to the specified motion or notice for closure. D, except as provided in Section 10-15-1H of the Open Meetings Act, any action taken as a result of discussion in closed meeting shall be made by vote of the Police Oversight Board in an open public meeting, passed by the Police Oversight Board this 11th day of October, 2018.
Thank you, Ms. Galloway.
I'm here all week.
Okay, all right, so we've accomplished that. Is that, that's not a vote, correct? We took it, okay. The next item is the HIPAA next request. Director Harness, you know anything about that?
Chair Waits, that's the item I discussed in my report.
Okay, so we've already discussed that, okay. Public involvement, prospective board members. We have an update on that. Looks like, I'm assuming not.
Ms. Segala, is this because we tabled it last time? I'm going to make a motion that we defer, is that the correct language? Withdraw, that we withdraw item F until such time as the board is prepared to discuss it again so that it will not appear on next month's agenda.
Okay, there's a motion that we withdraw.
I second your motion.
And a second. Any other comment? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All in favor. Thank you. I like that. City Council study session oversight ordinance. We don't have an update on that, so.
Chair Waits, no, it was just on the agenda in case any board members wanted to discuss their reactions to the study session.
Okay. All right. Any other comment?
I think we can bring this up at some other time, but in the
Okay.
interest of time, I'd like to table this. I
Okay.
mean, if it comes up, we can bring it up again.
Okay. Go ahead.
Do we need to vote to table this until next month or until a specified date?
We should,
I could also move
Withdraw.
to withdraw it.
yeah.
Okay, what
I
is
would
your
second the
pleasure?
motion to withdraw.
Your pleasure is to withdraw your motion?
My motion is to withdraw this.
And second by, Ms.
Me.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we will withdraw that. Okay, moving on to our consent agenda cases. Ms. Singer.
Okay, the consent agenda cases. First, we have the administrative closed cases. Do I have a motion?
I would move that we administratively close the cases listed.
I second. Any comments or any? Okay.
Do we need to read these into the
Yeah.
record?
Yeah, okay, they're
Okay.
case number 078-18, 200-18, 177-18, 210-18, 185-18, 231-18, 187-18, and 188-18.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to accept those. And second, any other comment? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay.
Next, we have on the non-consent agenda, 132-18.
I'm gonna move that we table this for the next meeting. Well, maybe we should hear from Director Harness first. I just know that we haven't had an opportunity to look, I should say I haven't reviewed it. I missed this case because it came out recently. And so I'm not able to vote on it, not having reviewed it, sorry.
Chair Waits, certainly the board could vote to table this one. My findings and my recommendations have already been forwarded to the chief based upon the time constraints. So the materials and my recommendations have been uploaded to SharePoint, so they are there for you to review.
Okay.
I would say that this is the case, if you recall, the board voted to write a letter to the APOA to extend the timelines in order to facilitate a more complete investigation based upon the fact that Investigator O'Neill was looking at a time frame from roughly March of 2012 to January of 2018, and trying to track down all of the contacts that APD had with this family. So I'm disappointed that the APOA did not grant that waiver. So certainly what is before you is a pretty narrowly focused investigation based upon the timeline. What I would like also, I understand tabling it tonight, but I would also like to review the internal affairs investigation for this same subject matter, which is closed and is at command for review. And then either at case review, subcommittee, or at policy, review these findings for policy recommendations, which this short time frame did not allow.
Okay.
I know I've asked you this before, I'm so sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Please forgive me. I know I've asked you this before. We have no recourse when APOA denies an extension, timeline extension, correct?
Chair Waits, Vice Chair Galloway, that is correct.
Okay.
Is that because we're not a party? Or is it just the way it is?
Chair Waits, Board Member Galloway, any waivers of time would be at the discretion of the parties in the collective bargaining agreement, and those persons who are affected have to grant that waiver. So therefore, that has to come from the lawyers or the union representatives or those that are subject of the investigation. They must be the ones to grant the waiver.
Okay, so we have a proposal on the table, it's a recommendation that we table this so that we all can review it, even though we can't take any direct action on it. Is there,
I move that we table it.
okay,
I second.
a motion and second that we table this. All in favor?
Can we
Aye.
have discussion?
Okay.
Sorry, I would amend that motion to also grant Director Harness the opportunity to bring this case before policy and procedure or case review or both, as he deems necessary for review of policy recommendations that need to come from it.
Is that a friendly amendment?
Yeah.
Chair Waits, Vice Chair Galloway, that's not really necessary because for policy recommendations based upon cases, there is no time
Okay.
limit. The only time is relating to the discipline recommendations related to the investigation.
Okay.
So,
Thank you.
okay, so there's no amendment to
Amendment.
it? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, all in favor, thank you. All righty. We had no non-concurrence cases? right?
Right.
Okay. No appeals, correct?
Correct.
Okay. We had any serious use of force, officer-involved shootings? None? Okay. And Garrity materials? We have none. Okay. Any other business to bring before this board? None? Okay. All right, can I get a motion to
I
adjourn?
move we adjourn.
I second.
It's been motioned and second that we adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
All right, no discussion?
My mic.
No discussion.
Okay.
You are ready?
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for participating.